Lars, Erik Ten Hag. He's only been in the job for a couple of months. Really? Has he fallen out with any of his players already?
I think that's a bit strong, Dotun. I wouldn't say alarm bells are fully ringing, but maybe the alarm bells are just kind of jingling a little bit. The bells are there and the wind is kind of brushing against them, causing a little bit of a sound. Because of course, they've lost a lot of players. Obviously, Wirtz going to Liverpool, Frimpong going to Liverpool, and now this Granit Xhaka to Sunderland deal. Now, that I think is significant and it's worth bringing up. Because just 1 week ago, Erik Ten Hag, and I want to quote him on this, said about Xhaka, he said, and I quote, "The agent can say anything, but this club has already lost 3 important players. We won't let any more players go. That's not possible. That would neglect the structure and also the culture of the squad. It's clear. Granit is a leader. He has signed here for 5 years and 3 years left on his contract. He is too important for us to let him go." And it is not ideal for a manager when you say things like that in a week after he goes to Sunderland. Just doesn't make you look very good. So there's some question marks creeping in there, to be fair.
But can we blame that? Can we blame the departure or the fallout from last season with Xabi Alonso going, etc.? Can we blame any of that on Erik Ten Hag? Surely Xhaka went of his own accord.
Yeah, no, and this is the thing. You could look at it as, you know, they've had incredible success under Xabi Alonso. They've achieved something they never thought they'd be able to achieve. Xabi Alonso, really eloquent, suave, handsome guy. He's been replaced by Erik Ten Hag, who's coming off a very visible disaster at Manchester United, and suddenly all the big guys leave. That kind of doesn't look great for him. But you could flip that on its head and say, maybe, given that you have gone from Erik Ten Hag, from Xabi Alonso to Erik Ten Hag, maybe it's not a terrible idea for Ten Hag that some of the biggest guys in the dressing room who might be a little not wild about the direction and who might feel that they've kind of peaked in their time at Leverkusen, that they do move on to things right now. Because if you look at the incomings, they're mostly young players. They brought in Malik Tillman from PSV. He's a very interesting player. He's 23 years old. Kwanzaa is 22. Mark Flecken, of course, is an experienced goalkeeper, but there's Ibrahim Maza for Hertha is 19. Christian Fofana from Albacete is 18. Faye from Häcken in Sweden is 20. So there's a real sort of, they're adding young guys who will probably be easier to work with, perhaps in mold and shape, and the one good takeaway from Ten Hag's time at United is that he seemed to do quite well with the young players out of the academy. So maybe actually big guys leaving could work in Ten Hag's favour. That's what I'm going to throw out there.
Surely, JJ, going back to Lars' point about the quote from Erik Ten Hag, if Erik Ten Hag makes a definitive statement like that and then the player leaves, Granit Xhaka in this situation, and then surely that undermines his authority at the club, doesn't it, amongst the players, and otherwise?
I don't think it does undermine his authority necessarily, because I think we'll only really know the true answer to that question once he's had, a couple of months, or at least the best part of the season, to really get to grips with this squad, and for the players to understand his methods, and for us to see sort of what shape this new Leverkusen takes. I think, if anything, I think it was a bit risky, both for the club and for Ten Hag. And a little bit for the player, really, for such strong communication to come out so early in the transfer window, because we all know, especially in a summer transfer window, that anything can really happen. And I think when you're coming off the back of such enormous success as Leverkusen have had over the last couple of years, I think when a new coach comes in and certain key players have been really integral to the success under the former coach, I think it's natural, especially when it's somebody like Ten Hag who really thrives with young players, almost looking to recreate sort of the success that he enjoyed with Ajax a few years back. It feels a lot further back in time than it actually is, I think, because of what happened at Manchester United. But it does feel like, if anything, it actually would suit Ten Hag for some of the stronger characters in the dressing room who were so influential under Xabi Alonso's management of that Leverkusen side, if they were to actually move on, because it almost makes his job a little bit more straightforward in terms of, building a new chemistry, sort of choosing the players that have the most influence, as opposed to sort of having someone sort of impose on him the fact that they were pretty much the leader of that group of players for, the most successful period in club history, really, which is, pretty much what it was for Leverkusen. So, I do think, if anything, that the communication probably should have been dialed down a little bit, because when you speak in such definitive terms so early on in the summer transfer window, I think it always sets you up for failure or to risk embarrassment.
I do think it's what you're saying is especially true for a character like Granit Xhaka, who was such a like Ten Hag says, he's a leader, and that's important. But the thing is, guys who have got really big personalities and take up a lot of space in the dressing room and are, natural leaders in the group, that's a really powerful and important thing to have in a team. But if those players are not 100% on board with the direction things are going in, that can be a real challenge for the coach. And if someone like Granit Xhaka, who's very strong-willed and strong-headed, as we know, looks at this and thinks, I've had the time of my life under Xabi Alonso, not sure about this Dutch guy, I'd rather do something else, you're probably better off not having him in the building, to be honest. And I'm not suggesting he's disloyal or unprofessional or anything. It's just that kind of vibe, it can spread, So I think that was a good solution for everyone. And I think, slight tangent, I think it's really cool that he's gone to Sunderland instead of going to Saudi Arabia for a pile of money. I think you can compare it to like when Esteban Cambiaso did a year for Leicester or something. Like, he's gone in to add experience, to add know-how to a newly promoted team. He's taken on a genuinely interesting professional challenge rather than going for the biggest paycheck. And that is very refreshing to see, because it doesn't seem to happen that often.
In terms of Erik Ten Hag, I think we can all agree, JJ, that this is a crucial season for him, perhaps the most important season of his career, because he's got to redeem himself now. People talk about, we know from what he did in the Dutch leagues that he's a very good coach. Yeah, but now he's got to be more than that. He's got to be whatever it takes to succeed Xabi Alonso, for one thing. The thing that Erik Ten Hag is criticised for most is the fallout with the players at Manchester United, amongst other things, but that was the most glaring in the public eye. And Xabi Alonso was the opposite. He had such a good relationship with his players. Granit Xhaka, that he turned around in terms of, his effectiveness from one season to another. And, they went through the mill for him. He needs to have that relationship. How hard is this season going to be?
I think it's going to be really, really, really difficult. It's going to be a huge challenge, probably the biggest challenge of Ten Hag's career so far. And I don't say that lightly. I think it's a bigger challenge than when he came in at Manchester United, because, seemingly for the best part of the last 10 years, once you've kind of been tarred by the Manchester United brush, it's extremely difficult to come out the other end, positively. The only kind of obvious example of someone who's sort of enjoyed major success after leaving United in the last sort of 10 years or so that I can think of right this second is someone like Angel Di Maria. It's very difficult to think of too many other really strong examples of people who've gone on to, to huge, success after, suffering for an extended period of time, at Old Trafford, as so many people seem to have done, in these last couple of years. And I think that for Ten Hag, it's a doubly difficult challenge, because you're not only succeeding Xabi Alonso and trying to follow in those footsteps, not necessarily recreate the same success, but, try to sort of emulate, the good times essentially, and the good results, the huge progress that have been made. And that in itself would already be enough of a challenge, but then also trying to sort of salvage your reputation somewhat. And I think this is what made Ten Hag jumping back into management so soon after leaving United so fascinating, because I do think when we're considering Ten Hag's situation, there is a large element of, I'm not going to say blame, but sort of responsibility for United to shoulder, because I think they extended Ten Hag and United's sort of mutual misery much longer than they should have done. And he probably should have had longer out of the game than he's had. I don't think really half a season is enough to properly refresh, but I think that also reflects the fact that Ten Hag feels probably hard done by, based on sort of how his time with United ended and, sort of what's happened to his reputation since then. So for me, I think, this is an enormous challenge that Ten Hag's taken on. Has he bitten off more than he can chew? Possibly, like I said earlier, in my answer to the first question, I do think only time will tell, because if he can rebuild Leverkusen in a similar way to the way that he structured his Ajax side, I think that he could ultimately be set up, to be fairly successful in the next couple of years. But I do think it might be a tricky transitional period for both Ten Hag and for Leverkusen, especially with, so many influential players moving on, and so many talismanic figures now no longer at the club. So for me, I think that it is going to be one of the most interesting storylines, certainly in the early part of the season in Europe this coming season.
I like the way that you caveated, certainly for the early part of the season. Da, da, da. But I mean, JJ has touched on this and alluded to it. If you're Erik Ten Hag, Lars, do you recreate in this transitional season? Remember, do you recreate your glorious Ajax team, or do you recreate, if you like, what Xabi Alonso's done?
Well, I think, listen, I'm in a glass half full kind of mood today, Dotun. So I'm gonna be looking for potential positives here, and the interesting thing to me is I remember when United appointed Ten Hag, and I was speaking to a friend of mine who really knows the Dutch scene and league very well, and he flagged up to me very early that while he is a good coach on a technical level, he's not an amazing communicator in public, and that could always be an issue with the extreme media scrutiny at Man United. And of course, he didn't have a record of working with like established big name superstars and their egos. And I think these were the two big things that really didn't work at United. I think some of his public appearances were verging on the bizarre, and I think that really undercut his authority in some ways. And I think it's clear that we don't need to re-legislate that, but what I'm getting at is I think Leverkusen could be a really good place for him, because Leverkusen, while they're more in the public eye now because of that incredible season they had under Xabi Alonso, they're still Leverkusen. They're culturally not a huge team. Like they famously don't have a massive fan base. There is just a little bit less pressure there than there is at other big teams in Germany. And they have this very clear strategy. Like I say, I reeled off the ages of the players who are brought in. They're very clear on like signing young guys that can be shaped and potentially sold on for a profit, rather than necessarily having a bunch of superstars in the dressing room. So I think that could actually quite suit the skill set of Ten Hag as we know it. The comparison to Xabi Alonso is, of course, the thing that really unlocked Leverkusen under Xabi was that they added a couple of more experienced players, that they added Granit Xhaka, that they added Hoffmann, some slightly older guys. That's not really happening so far this summer. So they seem to be going younger, but that is, again, with what we know of Ten Hag, what he has done well in the past. I think that could suit him.
If I was a Leverkusen fan, though, JJ, I wouldn't be enamored with the idea or the model. Let's buy some young players so that we can sell them on later on. I mean, as much as, then it's a valid point that Lars makes about the size of the club or the expectations of the club. Now you've tasted, the sweet wine of challenging Bayern Munich. Do you not then have to keep sort of trying to challenge them? If you're buying players to sell them on, it doesn't sound like the challenge that Bayern Munich need at the top of that Bundesliga.
No, and I think as well, Leverkusen would do well to sort of remember their core identity. And when I say that, I don't mean sort of, having the sort of Leverkusen, tag on them. I think they need to remember exactly what it was that sort of shaped the success that they enjoyed under Xabi Alonso, and sort of remain realistic, I guess, about sort of where their place is in terms of the domestic, but also the European sort of footballing hierarchy, where they will always sort of be seen as the outsiders. Yes, they had, some heady days, for the last couple of seasons, some, fantastic, moments that will never be forgotten by, many sort of people in and around the club. But also, I think that it's important that the club remains grounded in terms of their expectations, and they can't suddenly expect, for sort of every potential new manager that comes in the near future, assuming that they do move on from Ten Hag at some point in the next couple of years, to replicate that same success that came under Xabi Alonso. I think, they are a club who have always done well in terms of, educating young players, raising them up, and then ultimately selling them on. And I think that is a very good fit, as Lars was saying, with what Ten Hag has kind of forged his reputation as a manager with so far in his career. So, I do think it's important that ultimately Leverkusen remain very realistic, in terms of, who they are as a club and what they're looking to achieve, and that, a new manager like Ten Hag doesn't get judged against unrealistic objectives.
Yeah, this season, whatever this season holds, I think we'll agree, Lars, that the result of Leverkusen against Flamengo, the Brazilian team's under-20s, 5-1 to Flamengo's under-20 against Leverkusen, the senior side, is not a stat that any manager will want to see.
You don't love to see that, but I have to say, this is the time of year where you, on a personal level, you feel very tempted to watch these summer friendlies, right? Because none of the big football is happening, and you miss seeing these players and these teams. And I'm always tempted to tune in. And every year I convince myself to not do it, because these games, they are at the end of the day just training sessions, like whatever you want to call them. And there is this move, like, with this sort of ridiculous sort of Premier League summer series, and they're trying so hard to brand these things as meaningful games so they can sell tickets for more money. But the reality is they're training sessions, and whatever the results are, good or bad, it's a bad idea to get too hung up in what's going on there. And I think if you look at, like, it's not obviously not easy to replace Florian Wirtz and some of the players who are brought in, but I am really intrigued by the Malik Tillman move. Who's a 23-year-old German-American, brought in, attacking midfielder type, versatile, can play on the wings as well, been brought in from PSV. You used to be at Bayern Munich's academy, and it's kind of hard to judge because it's only in the Eredivisie, and I kind of feel like the Eredivisie is a strange league because it always produces talent, but it's always, because it's relatively a little bit weak, it's hard to gauge on a case-by-case basis how good those players are. But he is like an attacking number 10 type of guy who's actually 6'2". Like, he's a big unit, and he works really hard off the ball. And in addition to, like, flair and doing some really exciting things on the ball, he also's got real physical punch and works really hard. I think he's a super interesting addition to that squad, and want to keep an eye out for this season.